I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who switches coffee cups with her husband, but when you discover someone plans to destroy you, survival instincts take over in ways you never imagined. My hands were shaking as I stared at the glowing screen. Not from fear, from rage so pure it felt like fire in my chest. The tablet wasn't even mine. Daniel had left it on the counter when he rushed upstairs, claiming some client emergency that couldn't wait. I'd only bumped it while putting away dishes, and the screen had come alive, revealing words that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my marriage. She's finally going to crash and burn tomorrow. Once we close this contract, she's out for good. The message sat there in the thread, sent to someone saved as V with a little red heart. Vanessa, his so-called executive assistant, the woman who'd been staying late at the office with him 3, sometimes 4 nights a week for the past 2 months. I should have looked away. I should have set the tablet down and walked away. But I didn't. I scrolled, and what I found in those messages made my blood run cold. Months of conversation, intimate jokes about their future together, detailed plans for after our divorce, a divorce I didn't even know was coming. But worse than the affair, worse than the betrayal of our vows, was what they were planning to do with my business. Our business, or at least what I'd foolishly believed was ours. For 7 years, Daniel and I had built Apex Strategic Consulting from nothing. We'd started in Seattle, working from a studio apartment that barely fit a desk and a mattress. I'd been the architect of every strategy we'd ever sold, every pitch, every proposal, every framework that made our clients successful. That was my work, my sleepless nights, my research, my innovation. Daniel had been the performer, the charismatic presenter who could charm executives and close deals with his 1,000-watt smile and effortless confidence. I'd believed we were partners. I'd believed we each brought something essential to the table. The messages told a different story. You should see how pathetic she looks, hunched over her laptop at 2 in the morning, perfecting slides for tomorrow, one message read. She thinks this Westamont pitch is going to be her crowning achievement. She has no idea it's the last thing she'll ever do for this company. Vanessa's response made my stomach turn. Poor thing, working so hard for her own exit interview. How long until you tell her? After tomorrow, after the contract is signed. I've already talked to 3 investors who think she's just administrative support. They have no idea she does any real work. They think I'm the genius behind everything. I heard his footsteps on the stairs. In one fluid motion, I set the tablet exactly where it had been and turned back to the sink, my face a mask of calm I didn't feel. 7 years of managing his moods and egos had taught me how to hide everything beneath a pleasant smile. Everything good down here, babe? Daniel's arms wrapped around my waist from behind. Once, that embrace had felt like home. Now it felt like a trap closing around me. Perfect, I said, leaning into him with practiced ease. Just thinking about tomorrow's presentation. I think we're really going to impress them. His arms tightened. We're going to destroy it. This is our moment, Anna. Everything we've worked for comes down to this. Our moment? Our work? Such beautiful lies delivered with such conviction. That night, I didn't sleep, but I didn't spend the time worrying or crying either. I spent it planning. By sunrise, I'd contacted 3 people. First, my lawyer, Elizabeth Chen, someone I'd met through a client years ago, someone Daniel didn't know about. Second, our firm's accountant, requesting copies of every financial document, especially those showing the origin of our initial capital and the development of our proprietary methodologies. Third, I'd set up a discreet recording application on my phone. When Daniel woke at 7, I was already in our home office, looking fresh and energized despite having slept maybe 90 minutes. I'd learned how to function on pure adrenaline and determination. Big day, he said, appearing in the doorway with that confident swagger he always wore before important meetings. You're ready for this? More ready than I've ever been, and I meant every word, just not in the way he thought. The Westmont Group meeting was scheduled at 11 a.m. We'd be presenting via video conference to their executive board in San Francisco, plus a panel of 4 potential investors Daniel had been courting for months. This was supposed to be the deal that took our firm to the next level, a multi-year contract worth over $2 million. At 9:30, Daniel stood up from his desk. "I'm going to make us some coffee. You want your usual?" "That would be wonderful," I said, not looking up from my screen where I was reviewing the presentation one last time. Every slide was flawless, every argument airtight. I'd spent half a year researching Westmont's challenges, their competitors, their market position. This wasn't just a pitch, it was a masterpiece. He returned a few minutes later with 2 mugs, the ceramic ones we'd bought on our honeymoon in Vancouver, back when I still believed in us. He set mine down with particular care, almost tenderness. "Drink up," he said, smiling. "You're going to need the energy." The coffee looked normal, smelled normal, dark roast with a splash of cream, exactly how I'd drunk it for years. But something in his expression, a flicker of satisfaction, of anticipation, made my skin crawl. I lifted the mug to my lips and took the smallest sip possible, just to wet them. "Thank you, honey. You always know exactly what I need." His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and I caught the faintest smile. Vanessa, no doubt, wishing him luck on my imminent humiliation. "I need to use the bathroom before we start. Can you get the presentation loaded and ready? I want to hit the ground running." The second he disappeared down the hallway, I moved. Quick and silent, I switched our mugs, placing his in front of my computer and mine in front of his. Then I sat back down, pulled up the presentation, and waited with my heart hammering against my ribs. When Daniel returned, he sat down without a glance at the coffee, took a long drink, and smiled with me complete, beautiful oblivion. "Let's do this." The video call connected at exactly 11 a.m. Richard Westmont appeared on screen, a sharp-eyed man in his 50s with silver hair and a reputation for suffering no fools. Beside him sat Patricia Lim, their chief strategy officer, and Marcus Chen, their VP of operations. 4 additional windows showed the investors, all watching with the keen attention of people about to decide where to place millions of dollars. "Good morning," Richard said, his voice crisp and professional. "We're eager to hear what Apex Strategic has prepared for us." Daniel sat up straighter, radiating confidence. "Richard, thank you for this opportunity. Anna and I have been working around the clock to develop something truly transformative for Westmont Group." I noticed how he positioned himself as the leader while making sure to include my name, just enough to seem collaborative without giving me real credit. But as he reached for his coffee for another drink, I saw it, a slight tremor in his hand. Barely noticeable, but there. "Interesting." "Before we dive in," I said smoothly, "I want to say what an honor this is. Westmont's reputation for innovation is exactly what drew us to this opportunity." The investors nodded approvingly. Daniel shot me a quick look. Irritation, maybe, or was that already the beginning of the drug taking effect? "Let's get started," Daniel said, clicking to the first slide. "Our analysis reveals that Westmont faces 3 critical challenges in today's market environment." He paused, blinked hard. 3 critical challenges that are currently limiting your growth potential and market position." His voice was still strong, but something was off. He was speaking more slowly than usual, like he was concentrating harder to form the words. Richard leaned forward slightly, his attention sharpening. These people didn't miss anything. "The first challenge," Daniel continued, "involves operational silos across your regional divisions. Based on our research—" He stopped again, rubbing his temple with one hand while reaching for the coffee with the other. "Based on our research, you could achieve 23% improved efficiency through integrated workflow systems." I watched the investors' faces. They were listening, but I could see the subtle shift. Daniel was stumbling on material that should have been second nature. "The second challenge centers on data fragmentation," I said seamlessly. "Your current infrastructure creates information delays that cost you approximately $2.4 million annually in missed opportunities." As I spoke, Daniel took another long drink from his mug, the cup that had been meant for me. The irony was so perfect, it was almost poetic. Daniel, would you like to walk them through the technical framework? I asked sweetly. He blinked several times, visibly trying to focus. Yes, absolutely. The technical framework is quite sophisticated and basically, his words were beginning to slur, just slightly, just enough to notice. Richard's eyebrows rose. In a meeting this important, with this much money on the line, any sign of unprofessionalism could kill a deal instantly. And Daniel was about to make everything so much worse. 20 minutes into the presentation, my husband had gone from confident executive to someone who looked like he might fall out of his chair. Mr. Keegan, Patricia Lim's voice cut through the awkward silence as Daniel stared at the screen with unfocused eyes. Are you feeling all right? I'm sorry, Daniel said, shaking his head like he was trying to clear it. I'm not sure what's... He reached for the coffee again, drinking like it might somehow help him think clearly. Whatever he'd put in there was working exactly as he'd intended it to work on me. Mr. Keegan, Richard said, his expression shifting from polite interest to genuine concern, perhaps we should reschedule if you're unwell. I saw my opening and took it. Richard, if I may, I said, my voice calm and professional. Daniel has been pushing himself incredibly hard to prepare for this presentation. He was up past 3 this morning making final adjustments. Why don't I take over while he takes a moment to collect himself? It was perfect. I appeared concerned and supportive while subtly implying his behavior was just exhaustion, not whatever was really happening. More importantly, I was positioning myself to save what he was destroying. That would be helpful, Marcus said. We're very interested in seeing the complete proposal. Daniel tried to protest. No, I'm fine. But when he attempted to stand, he swayed visibly and had to grip the desk to steady himself. The investors exchanged glances that spoke volumes. This man was supposed to lead a multi-million-dollar implementation project, and he couldn't even complete a presentation. Please, sweetheart, I said, standing and placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Let me handle this. You've already done so much. To the camera, I added, I know this proposal inside and out. Daniel and I have been true collaborators on every aspect of this strategy. What I didn't say was that I had created 95% of it myself while he'd been out schmoozing clients and, apparently, planning my professional execution. I smoothly advanced to the next slide. As I was explaining, your data fragmentation creates cascading problems throughout your entire operation. Our Q2 analysis shows these delays cost you roughly $400,000 per quarter in operational inefficiency alone. Now I was in my element. This was what I'd been born to do, take complex business problems and create elegant, profitable solutions that executives could understand and implement. As I spoke, I watched the room transform. The concern on their faces melted into interest, then genuine excitement. These were smart people who recognized expertise when they saw it. Furthermore, I continued, clicking to a detailed implementation roadmap I'd spent weeks developing, our phased approach would have you seeing measurable ROI within 60 days, with full optimization achieved in 4 months. Richard leaned back in his chair, clearly impressed. Miss Keegan, these projections are ambitious. How confident are you in these numbers? Completely confident, I replied without hesitation. We've modeled these scenarios against 4 comparable companies in similar market positions. In each case, our methodology exceeded projected outcomes by an average of 18%. Behind me, Daniel was fighting desperately to regain his composure. He'd managed to sit back down, but his face was pale, and he kept blinking like he couldn't quite focus his vision. The substance he'd meant to humiliate me with was systematically destroying his credibility instead, and I was thriving in the space his collapse had created. This is exceptional work, Patricia said. The depth of analysis here goes well beyond what we've seen from other firms. Thank you, I said genuinely. This project represents 6 months of intensive research and strategic development. We understand you're evaluating multiple consulting firms, which is exactly why we've gone several levels deeper than surface recommendations. As I spoke, one of the investors, a woman named Jennifer Park from Redstone Capital, was taking notes furiously. That was always a good sign. In my peripheral vision, I saw Daniel reaching for his coffee again, still confused about why he felt worse instead of better. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. He'd planned to watch me collapse in humiliation, to use my failure as justification for pushing me out. Instead, he was witnessing my finest professional moment while experiencing the exact fate he designed for me. But this was just the beginning. The real revenge was still to come. Moving to our implementation timeline, I said, advancing slides with practiced ease, you'll see we've structured this in 4 distinct phases, each with clear milestones and measurable success metrics. Richard nodded, but his attention kept drifting to Daniel, who was now gripping his chair arms like the room was spinning. "Mr. Keegan, are you certain you don't need medical attention?" This was the moment I'd been waiting for. "You know what?" I said, as if the thought had just occurred to me. "Daniel, why don't you step away for a few minutes? Get some fresh air. I can handle the rest of the presentation." Daniel looked at me with confusion, and was that fear? He was beginning to realize something seriously wrong, but he couldn't figure out what. Yes, maybe that's best," he mumbled, struggling to his feet. As he left the room, swaying slightly, I turned back to the camera with a concerned but professional expression. "I apologize for the interruption. My husband has been under enormous pressure preparing for this meeting. He's incredibly dedicated, sometimes to a fault." "Of course," Patricia said kindly. "Please continue. We're very impressed so far." And continue I did. Without Daniel's presence, I felt a freedom I hadn't experienced in years. This was my work, my expertise, my moment. I moved through the remaining slides with precision and passion, fielding every question with detailed knowledge that clearly impressed everyone watching. "Your competitive analysis is particularly thorough. How did you develop such detailed insights into our market position?" 4 months of deep research, I replied honestly. I personally conducted 22 interviews with industry experts, analyzed 7 years of market data, and ran focus groups with your target demographic segments. This isn't theoretical. It's based on real-world intelligence gathered specifically for Westmont. I could see the excitement building in their expressions. These were smart people who recognized expertise when they saw it. Furthermore, I encountered as I approached the final slides, how long have you been developing these strategic frameworks? I've been refining these approaches for about 3 years. When we learned about the opportunity to work with Westmont, I adapted and customized everything specifically for your unique challenges. What I didn't mention was that Daniel had contributed virtually nothing to the strategic development. He'd been focused on expensive client dinners and golf outings, while I'd been doing the actual work of building our business. The financial projections are compelling, but implementation is where most consulting projects fail. How do you ensure successful execution? I smiled. This is where I truly excelled. Accountability is built into every single phase. Weekly progress reports, bi-weekly milestone reviews, monthly strategic assessments. Plus, I personally oversee every major implementation step. You're not hiring a firm that hands you off to junior staff. You're getting senior-level expertise throughout the entire process. "You, personally?" Richard asked. "Absolutely. When you work with Apex Strategic, I'm your primary resource from start to finish." I was being careful with my language, subtly positioning myself as the key asset, rather than Daniel, but doing it professionally, focusing on capability versus making any negative comments about my husband. The presentation concluded to enthusiastic responses from everyone. Richard looked genuinely excited. Patricia was asking detailed follow-up questions. The investors were clearly impressed. Miss Keegan, this has been outstanding. I have to ask, is this level of strategic thinking typical of your work? It is, I replied confidently. I believe in going beyond surface-level analysis to uncover real opportunities for sustainable growth. How soon could you begin implementation if we move forward? Marcus asked. Immediately, I've already cleared my calendar in anticipation of this project. My complete attention would be dedicated to ensuring Westmont's success. Again, I was careful to say I rather than we. Not inaccurately, I truly would be the one doing the work, but it was also strategically positioning myself as the primary value. That's when Daniel stumbled back into the room. He looked worse than when he'd left. His face was gray. He moved like every step required concentration. There was genuine confusion in his eyes, like he couldn't understand what was happening to his own body.
"How's it going?" he asked, his words noticeably slurred. The contrast was devastating. Here I was, having just delivered a flawless presentation with confidence and expertise, while he could barely form coherent sentences. "We were just discussing implementation timelines," I said gently, as if speaking to someone who was clearly ill. "Why don't you sit down, honey?" Richard's expression had shifted to one of concern mixed with professional assessment. In the business world, reliability was everything. What he was witnessing would raise serious questions about Daniel's ability to handle a complex, high-stakes project. "Mr. Keegan," Richard said carefully, "perhaps we should wrap up for now and continue this conversation when you're feeling better?" No, Daniel protested, trying to inject energy into his voice. "I'm fine, just need a minute. Let me walk you through the final recommendations." But when he tried to advance to the next slide, he clicked the wrong button and accidentally closed the entire presentation. The fumbling that followed, his desperate attempts to reopen the file while clearly struggling with basic computer functions, was painful to watch. "It's all right," I said smoothly, reopening the presentation on my computer and sharing my screen instead. "Technical difficulties happen to everyone. Here we are." I guided the discussion through the final points with professional grace, making Daniel's struggles look like minor hiccups rather than major failures. But the damage was already done. These executives had seen everything they needed to see. As the meeting wound down, Richard made a comment that sent a chill of satisfaction down my spine. "Miss Keegan, your expertise is precisely what we're looking for. We'll be in touch very soon with our decision." Not your firm's expertise, not Apex Strategic's expertise, my expertise. After we ended the call, Daniel slumped in his chair, looking confused and exhausted. "What happened?" he asked weakly. "I felt completely fine this morning, and then—" "You've been pushing yourself too hard," I said with false sympathy. "Why don't you go lie down? I'll handle any follow-up communications." As he struggled to stand and make his way to our bedroom, I sat alone in the office, contemplating what had just occurred. The meeting had exceeded my wildest expectations. I hadn't just salvaged what Daniel tried to destroy, I'd potentially secured the biggest contract of our careers. But more importantly, I documented everything. The recording on my phone captured not just Daniel's deteriorating condition, but his own words. "I felt completely fine this morning." The coffee had been the turning point, and I had evidence of that. Now it was time to spring the next trap. Within 2 hours, while Daniel was sleeping off whatever substance he'd intended to use on me, I was already implementing phase 2. I called Elizabeth Chen first. "Elizabeth, it's Anna Keegan. We need to meet today. I have evidence of my husband attempting to drug me, plus documentation of his plans to steal our business and frame me as incompetent." "Elizabeth, those are serious allegations. What kind of evidence?" "Audio recordings, text messages, and witness testimony from a business meeting where he accidentally dosed himself with whatever he'd put in my coffee. Can you meet at 3? Next, I forwarded the screenshots I'd taken of Daniel's text conversation with Vanessa to my secure email account, 3 different accounts actually, as backup. Then I composed a carefully worded email to Richard Westmont. "Dear Richard, Thank you for your time today. I wanted to follow up personally regarding a few details from our presentation. As you may have noticed, my husband seemed unwell during our meeting. This morning's incident has brought to light some personal matters I need to address, matters that could affect our professional relationship going forward. I want to assure you that my commitment to this project remains absolute, and my ability to deliver exceptional results is in no way compromised by these personal circumstances. I'll be available by email and phone for any questions you might have. It was professional, but hinted at underlying issues without being explicit. Richard was shrewd, he'd read between the lines. Finally, I called our business accountant and requested an emergency audit of all company finances, specifically documenting who had contributed what to the business, including intellectual property, client relationships, and capital investments. By 2:30, I'd also visited our bank and opened a separate business account, transferring the funds I could prove I'd personally contributed to the company. Daniel was still sleeping when I left for my attorney meeting. I left a note saying I'd gone to run errands. Let him think everything was normal for a few more hours. The irony was exquisite. He'd spent months planning to push me out, thinking I was too trusting and naive to see it coming. But his arrogance had blinded him to the most crucial fact. I had built this company. I was the strategist, the researcher, the one who created the solutions our clients paid for. He'd just been the attractive face delivering my work. Now he was about to learn exactly what happened when you underestimated the woman who made your success possible. When I returned home at 5:30 p.m., I found Daniel awake but still groggy, sitting at our kitchen table with chamomile tea. The irony of him drinking something I'd prepared wasn't lost on me, though this time it was genuinely harmless. "Feeling better?" I asked, setting down my bag with carefully practiced concern. "I don't understand what happened," he said, rubbing his temples. "I felt completely fine this morning, and then—" "You've been pushing yourself too hard," I said with false sympathy. "Why don't you go lie down? I'll handle any follow-up communications." As he struggled to stand and make his way to our bedroom, I sat alone in the office contemplating what had just occurred. The meeting had exceeded my wildest expectations. I hadn't just salvaged what Daniel tried to destroy, I'd potentially secured the biggest contract of our careers. But more importantly, I documented everything. The recording on my phone captured not just Daniel's deteriorating condition, but his own words. I felt completely fine this morning. The coffee had been the turning point, and I had evidence of that. Now it was time to spring the next trap. Within 2 hours, while Daniel was sleeping off whatever substance he'd intended to use on me, I was already implementing phase 2. I called Elizabeth Chen first. "Elizabeth, it's Anna Keegan. We need to meet today. I have evidence of my husband attempting to drug me, plus documentation of his plans to steal our business and frame me as incompetent." "Elizabeth, those are serious allegations. What kind of evidence?" "Audio recordings, text messages, and witness testimony from a business meeting where he accidentally dosed himself with whatever he'd put in my coffee. Can you meet at 3? Next, I forwarded the screenshots I'd taken of Daniel's text conversation with Vanessa to my secure email account, 3 different accounts actually, as backup. Then I composed a carefully worded email to Richard Westmont. "Dear Richard, thank you for your time today. I wanted to follow up personally regarding a few details from our presentation. As you may have noticed, my husband seemed unwell during our meeting. This morning's incident has brought to light some personal matters I need to address, matters that could affect our professional relationship going forward. I want to assure you that my commitment to this project remains absolute, and my ability to deliver exceptional results is in no way compromised by these personal circumstances. I'll be available by email and phone for any questions you might have." It was professional, but hinted at underlying issues without being explicit. Richard was shrewd, he'd read between the lines. Finally, I called our business accountant and requested an emergency audit of all company finances, specifically documenting who had contributed what to the business, including intellectual property, client relationships, and capital investments. By 2:30, I'd also visited our bank and opened a separate business account, transferring the funds I could prove I'd personally contributed to the company. Daniel was still sleeping when I left for my attorney meeting. I left a note saying I'd gone to run errands. Let him think everything was normal for a few more hours. The irony was exquisite. He'd spent months planning to push me out, thinking I was too trusting and naive to see it coming, but his arrogance had blinded him to the most crucial fact. I had built this company. I was the strategist, the researcher, the one who created the solutions our clients paid for. He'd just been the attractive face delivering my work. Now he was about to learn exactly what happened when you underestimated the woman who made your success possible. When I returned home at 5:30 p.m., I found Daniel awake but still groggy, sitting at our kitchen table with chamomile tea. The irony of him drinking something I'd prepared wasn't lost on me, though this time it was genuinely harmless. "Feeling better?" I asked, setting down my bag with carefully practiced concern. "I don't understand what happened," he said, rubbing his temples. "I felt completely fine this morning, and then—" "You've been pushing yourself too hard," I said with false sympathy. "Why don't you go lie down? I'll handle any follow-up communications." As he struggled to stand and make his way to our bedroom, I sat alone in the office contemplating what had just occurred. The meeting had exceeded my wildest expectations. I hadn't just salvaged what Daniel tried to destroy, I'd potentially secured the biggest contract of our careers. But more importantly, I documented everything. The recording on my phone captured not just Daniel's deteriorating condition, but his own words. "I felt completely fine this morning." The coffee had been the turning point, and I had evidence of that. Now it was time to spring the next trap. Within 2 hours, while Daniel was sleeping off whatever substance he'd intended to use on me, I was already implementing phase